It's my very great pleasure to introduce our second speaker, Lindsey Davis. Lindsey has instructed me to keep this short, and I am going to try, Lindsey, but there's quite a lot to say. Lindsey, as you all know, is one of Britain's most distinguished and best-loved authors. She has just published her 33rd book, Pandora's Boy, which is available in the foyer, which only arrived on the shelves a couple of weeks ago, and is the latest in her incredibly popular series of books, currently about Flavia Albia, who is the adopted daughter of the wonderful Marcus Didius Fulco, who we all know and love. Lindsey has also written 4 other standalone books, one about the English Civil War, and many short stories. And she really is world famous. I was doing my research and discovered that Lindsey's books have been, or are about to be, translated into 19 different languages, from Catalan to Russian to Turkish, so truly international. She has won many awards. The list is as long as my arm. I'm not going to list them all, but I did have my eye caught by the Crime Writers Association Cartier Diamond Dagger Award for Lifetime Achievement, and I was really hoping, Lindsey, that you got the Diamond Dagger, because that would be cracking. Dorothy Dunnett very much enjoyed Lindsey's work, and I have a quote here from Dorothy, which comes from a newspaper article that was published in 1991, and she says, I get sent a lot of historical novels in proof, and even though I won't give quotes, I always say that if I read a book, I'll certainly talk about it. I read a book I like, I'll certainly talk about it. And the most enjoyable book I've read recently is The Silver Pigs by Lindsey Davis, also available in the foyer, which is about a slave in ancient Rome who is a private eye, told in a fast kind of Brooklyn style with great verve. So that's the words of the lady herself. Lindsey came across Dorothy Dunnett's novels as a teenager and was enraptured, as we all were and have been. And I'm delighted that she's with us to tell us about her love for Dorothy Dunnett, the influence, if any, that Dorothy Dunnett has had on her career, and the experience shared with Dorothy of managing a large group of deeply involved fans over a very long series. So, ladies and gentlemen, Lindsey Davis.
Thank you. First of all, I have to apologise for the fact that age having taken its toll, I have to speak to you sitting down. I used to like to stand up because I had been taught at the Civil Service College in Sunningdale that you should command your audience, and now you're in command of me, so that's a bit slightly terrifying. And I should say I do actually have a Cartier diamond dagger, but it's only 1 inch long, and so I tend never to wear it because it gets left on the clothing afterwards because it's so small I don't see it. Right. First of all, thank you very much indeed for inviting me. It is a great honour indeed, especially as I actually like Dorothy's work. It's always very awkward when someone invites you to talk to a society and you think they're nuts. And I would like to say special thanks to Kathy, who has had to negotiate the ins and outs of getting me here and getting me to agree to be videoed, which I was going to say no to, but my agent said, well, it's not what you usually do, and anyway, it's good marketing. So I have agreed to that, and if you want to know the detailed terms, they are that only members of the society may see it, though if it's online, I think that's going to be perhaps tricky to manage, and that it may not be sold for commercial purposes. That's always a bit hard to have things work you've done not bringing in money, but there we are. So this is a Dorothy Dunnett weekend, it's not a Lindsey Davis weekend, so what I'm going to say will take as its starting point that fact. I will undoubtedly wander off into other territory, and I will talk about my own work as well, because I think you need a bit of variety, if you don't mind my saying so. But when we come to question time, you can wander off into variety as well. And if I haven't said enough about my own work, and there are people here who want to ask demanding questions, you may find that that's your moment to do so. We have been given until lunchtime. And lunch can be moved if needs be. I have to say, last week I did a talk in Tiverton, and in the end I had to say, I'm sorry, but you have to go home now. So I'm expecting the same quantity of demands from you. And there is something else that I have to say that I don't usually say. For the Dorothy Dunnetts in particular, I have to say that I was taught by Pauline Brace, who you know well, and also by Kate Flint, who you may also have known before she died. And so they were stalwarts of your society, and as I come before you today, this is a somewhat unusual situation in that I am terrified because I am speaking in front of my teacher. The remarkable thing to me is that Pauline hasn't produced one of those briefcases that commercial travellers had and removed me from it as a sample of her produce. She's sitting here on the front row pretending she knows nothing about what I'm talking about. Clearly, I have to do these redoubtable women a great deal of credit here. And to some extent, the fact that I am here reflects the education that I had. I'll come to that in a little while. The title of my talk is We Have to Talk About Influences, and its theme really is that we don't have to talk about influences, because I don't think that applies, but we'll work through that as we go along. Steered by Kathy, who has made it quite plain to you and to me that I have to talk about the impact of Dorothy on me, I looked back to what I wrote for Pauline. It's very much actually homework for my teacher, but for Dorothy, to put in the festschrift that was done for her in 2000. And I understand that it was given to Dorothy, it was written for Dorothy, and so almost nobody in the room will have seen what I wrote. So it seems, therefore, that it is okay, if I can use that phrase in front of my teacher, to quote some of it, because it is written as rather nice homework, actually. It was called Dorothy Dunnett Prevented Me Writing. On the train up, I had a little conversation with Pauline about whether that should have been Dorothy Dunnett Prevented My Writing, or whether it should have been Dorothy Dunnett Prevented Me From Writing. But we'll pass over that, and I'm going to read you some of the things I said to Dorothy. Remember, I am addressing Dorothy, though perhaps with a slight feeling that others might know it one day. I said, this is a rare thing to say, but in fact, now that I've seen copies of Whispering Gallery, I know this is an experience you or many of you have shared. I can still visualise the exact moment when I decided to read The Game of Kings. I was in the school library, alone, don't know where the others were, back to the window, facing the corridor. In the centre of the middle shelf were two big novels with interesting jacket spines. I'd heard nothing about them or their author, but secret discovery and savouring a good book that nobody else seems to know about has always been part of the reading experience for me. I did hesitate. Too much Scottishness might have put me off, despite my occasional certainty that I was Bonnie Prince Charlie, fostered on my unwitting parents temporarily until I came into my own. I was a Brummie, I have to say, with no Scottish heritage at all, so this was somewhat ludicrous. Of all the books I have enjoyed, none have given me such tremendous pleasure and overwhelmed me at the same time with so much despair. Partly this was the problem of falling in love with Lyman, so let's get that out of the way. I was never the type to start knitting him jumpers. I knew he was a character, not real. I couldn't have him. I knew that would have been the case even if he had been real. Acknowledging it was hard and extremely important to a girl who'd yet to acquire her first boyfriend, but who had glumly observed the weedy possibilities. Worst of all, Worst of all was the dark recognition years in advance that even the most fascinating fellows in my own life could not and would not come anywhere near the astounding Mr. Crawford. I grew up, oh, how I grew up, as the series was published, waiting with mixed hunger and trepidation for the next book. This in itself was an important lesson for a future writer. The unforgiving reader owns your creation as a partner in the dialogue and must not be betrayed. The first 3 books I had were the first hardback novels I ever bought for myself. And later as a student, I had to change to those Sphere paperbacks that I think you probably know well, with the ludicrous bodice ripper jackets, from which I learned early not to expect publishers to understand what it is they are publishing. I have stories about that, believe me. The book that affected me most was The Disorderly Nights, which I remember I read one summer holiday between O and A levels during a spell of idyllic weather when What Shall I Do With My Life was a looming issue with few answers. The Siege of Malta was a better place to be, even though I was facing a new realism and knew I would probably not have been a devilish commander, but one of the bastinadoed slaves. Later, by the end of Checkmate, with me in my early 20s by then, my attitude to Lyman had in fact changed. The not-so-fascinating fellows at university had affected me. Later still, as a civil servant in Croydon, reading in my bleak bedsit was the life-saver that authors hoped to provide, and yet reading books that were too good perversely depressed me as I came to believe that the obvious career move into writing, or any move from the civil service this is, was beyond my capabilities. Consciously cynical for good personal reasons, I derived a theory of why women authors create devastating heroes and why women readers follow them so passionately. I was originally thinking of the madder aspects of that other blue-eyed blonde, Lord Peter Wimsey, but as I was attending frequent management courses, I'd been taught by chaps in tight floral shirts to squash everything into the shape, whether triangle or pie chart, of the current theory, so I had one. It was not, I thought, that these are men we love, but these are the men we would like to be. Discuss. It's a good one for writing groups if you believe in them. I do still consider this theory from time to time, trying not to apply it to my moth-eaten falco in case I should die laughing. So, the title of my festschrift, Dorothy Dunnett Prevented Me Writing. A jolly good thing too. Nobody should attempt to write until they've lived and have something to say. Also, the creation of fiction should be a joy, not a therapy. The reading of fiction is certainly an escape, be it from trivial stress or crushing misery, and its writing may provide the knotted sheet route out of a narrow life, but it was better to wait, to mull and marinade the passions. In the long run, controlled passion pays more gas bills. And while an author is supposed never to mention the money as a motive, a girl whose role models had started with Sibylla, Janet Beaton and Kate was bound to be practical. So it's actually with thanks that I remember, I'm saying this to Dorothy, remember, now, the main reason the Lyman series defeated my aspirations, I thought I shall never be able to write like this. I still think it, but you learn to compromise. I'm old enough at last to want to write only as myself, and so I dare to have a go. The standards are what matters. Sometimes for professional reasons I have to read that great raft of structurally competent yet deadly dull work which somehow still gets published, despite Dorothy Dunnett showing the way. Often I have to discuss what good historical novels are, trying to explain that it goes beyond meticulous research, even when done by the author for pure enjoyment and not as a chore, and far beyond that concept people call historical accuracy, as if it was something you could measure out in kilograms on the veg scales in Tesco's. Mention a cracking good story in the context of historicals, and so often there is a puzzled hush. Pages sticking together, sorry. So what was it that meant so much to me from the moment I first looked at the Game of Kings? The very first ingredient had to be immediacy. Lyman is back. Who, where, why, what's he going to do, and to whom? How much will it hurt? What poetry will he quote? What will the women say? Just how annoyed will the men be? It's the ability to carry all of those questions through scene after scene and book after book, staying just as fresh and becoming even more urgent. Every sentence alive, every scene pointed and perfect, gripping dialogue narrated so you hear not just the words, but every accompanying creak of satin or harness lever. In fact, so you virtually hear the speakers and listeners breathe. And then, of course, the Chinese curse does not apply. We do want to live in interesting times. No one can better Dorothy for taking the parts of history you thought you knew about, then proving that previously you knew nothing, and for taking the huge, new, exotic arena and convincing you that she has taught you everything. It was the politics I liked best, that luscious leap from ordinary novels that were only about who won the wars and won or lost the women, into sophistication with a new jingling, tingling emphasis on who was the most devious in winning or the most jealous in losing, how they appeared to do it, and how they probably really did, not to mention ways the deviously ambitious might possibly be stopped. Then, helped by the scope of a huge series, one has to applaud what she does with the glorious characters she builds. The complexity of their emotions goes far beyond anything in most novels. They develop in intelligent, sometimes unbearable ways. The only one I found really hard to stomach was Too Good to Be True, Too Bad to Be True, Graham Mallet, but I understood his role as a foil, just as I understand why Philippa has to make her sacrifice. In my books, all blondes tend to be swiped out of the story casually and fast, while the auburn tints rule. There's a reason for this. At least there was until I started to go white. A passing thought. If the Dunnett oeuvre, in the Dunnett oeuvre, incest, rape and drugs were features long before they became fashionable writing accessories, how many adolescents have been held back from disaster by deep knowledge of the effects of too much elephant medicine? And how many hard-boiled cream noir practitioners, sweet is all I can tell you, who think they are showing the seamy side of society in a groundbreaking manner, and understand that, in fact, a respectable Scotswoman did it years ago, far better and without recourse to four-letter words. And that brings me to the words. What pulled me up short from the first, and still does, is the sheer quality of her writing. Those of us who read and write historical novels ruefully accept that they tend to be sneered at in some quarters, apart from a select few, often quite hard-going things that have wriggled into some literary niche. I have no idea what I meant by that phrase. In fact, many historicals are, and always have been, very well written. As with all genre novels, they have authors who write with more passion and readers with higher standards than is the perceived view. Real page-turners take talent. But Dorothy brought us a talent that kicks in with real gusto, subtle, intelligent, full of variety, compassionate and humorous. Her long set pieces are strikingly good, but she can also turn a short sentence like nobody else. And her enormous vocabulary gives such staggering richness to the text. Anyone who can get little brummies using oriflamme in casual conversation on the school bus has a lot to answer for. The Microsoft spell checker was on my mind when I wrote this, which is nearly 20 years ago. It can't even do bedsit, let alone bastinado. Mind you, it also thought that you mean lemonade when you type in Lymond. So, Dorothy Dunnett prevented me writing. Not permanently, though. She showed me the highest quality for historical novels, and if it was daunting, it was also, in the end, a challenge. Young girls who grow up reading the right books grow up believing it is natural to rise to such challenges. A long pause to forget her strong voice and find my own had to be of benefit. It must be obvious that she was inspirational too, a shining influence in my own desire to write only good books and only to write them well. So that was what I said to her. And now I'll say what I have to say to you, because we have loads of time left. the one thing that was wrong in what I said to Dorothy, or rather was carefully disguised, was that I read Lyman, and I think I read Johnson Johnson as, equally with pleasure, though I took him with more of a pinch of salt. But I could never, and you have to accept this, I could never get on with Niccolo or with King Hereafter. And I'm going to talk about why that might have been, because I think it's good for all of us sometimes to think about why people don't like books. We know why we do like them, but what happened? I found Lyman when I was at school, devoured it through my time at university, but then after university, my own reading habits changed, and I think some of it was to do with my personal circumstances. It does happen to me, and perhaps I should say this first of all, that people stop reading my work. Only this very month, a man who claimed to have an MA in psychology emailed me on my publication day to say that he was no longer going to read Albia because he only wanted Falco. It seems to me that he was either deliberately nasty or he wasn't quite so good a psychologist as he thought. I would never have done that to Dorothy. In fact, I implied to her, I think, that I read everything of hers with equal pleasure. So why did I change? It may simply be that I grew up. That's the obvious thing to think, but in fact, it's belied by, with respect to the age of this audience today. I think it is likely I'd watched in my personal life too much suffering among the people who were close to me, and that affected all my reading habits. In fact, I'd seen mental health problems, suicide, alcoholism, men behaving very badly. I was a young girl, remember. And I stopped finding solace in reading about other people suffering. I think I stopped reading fiction for a long time altogether, though that was partly because I had a sort of puritanical belief that once you started a novel or any book, you had to finish it. And I made the mistake of starting to read Don Quixote. And 5 years later, I was released to be able to read other books. But the fact was that there is no deep catharsis for me, or there was no deep catharsis, and to some extent it's still true. I will never again go to King Lear or Othello. And that's a sadness in some ways. I will never go to Titus Andronicus. But let's put it in perspective. I have never seen The Sound of Music or read Harry Potter. So it works two ways. I think you can and you should exercise choice, not be pushed by what people think everyone should do. It doesn't make you a bad person or even a yahoo. Another difference that began to apply when I left university, which I went to an elite, highly privileged university, I should say, was that personally I became increasingly aware of and proud of my own origins. Dorothy and I were socially alien beings. My father had a degree from London University, but he gained it by correspondence course. My mother passed the exam to go to grammar school, but her family couldn't afford it, so she had to get a job. Dorothy famously never cooked a meal in her life. She boasted to me that it was a condition of her marriage, that she should not have to. Now, when my parents married, my mother's brothers told my father, perhaps with some glee, that he'd better not expect ever to get any dinner because Joni would always have her nose in a book. She bought a cookbook. She became a cracking provider. I still have her cookbook, Cooking with Elizabeth Craig, and I make its mincemeat every year. The lads at the gym I go to start asking for mince pies as early as March, at least they did this year. So, I came from a family that read. They went to the library. They belonged to the Left Book Club. That leads you towards what I'm about to say next. And they believed in books as a way to better themselves. But my ancestors are lamplighters, butchers, hairdressers, atheists, trade unionists, rat catchers and shopkeepers, not to mention the one who hid behind a bush hoping to assassinate Bismarck. This is true. In my 20s, I became the person you would expect from such a background. I felt it was proper that I should be that person. It's probably held me back. I can think of occasions when I know it has, but I don't care. Falco and Albia, my characters, would never have existed if this was not my own milieu. I write from the streets looking up. I don't have the nobility except as characters passing through. It didn't stop me and Dorothy being friends, however, when occasionally we met. What is interesting to me about Dorothy is that although she showed the way in such an astonishing way, to such an astonishing degree, as I alluded to in the Festschrift, very few people seem to have followed what she did. You would think there would be lots and lots of people writing in the same way, if not quite to the same standard. And this hasn't happened. And perhaps I approve of that in a way. I don't want to see mediocre Dorothy clones, because my belief is that although I too had been taught to appreciate narrative, word choice, vocabulary, fearless settings, heart-stopping tragedy, and rumbustious humour, I too loved history. I feel that you have to do it in your own way if it's to be any good. One thing I will say is that I loved history very much, as Dorothy did. I still do. A great sadness to me is that while I receive quantities of notes about history and the way I handle it in my books, I hardly ever get asked about the writing. And to me, I suppose the writing is more important. You could say it means I hide the way things are written so well that people just don't spot it, but I think it goes beyond that. My degree is in English language and literature, and that matters enormously to me. When I go to festivals, I yearn to be allowed to speak about grammar and word choice rather than shoved on yet another Tudors and Tabards panel, because if you write historicals, that is your place. Better be glad you have it. So, Cathy asked me to talk about the unique challenges faced by Dorothy and me as the creators of a series of supremely successful historical novels. This is going to be quick. I don't see it as a challenge. It's a luxury. There are things you have to be careful about. You have to watch out for the logistics, eye colour. I should say I have no truck with cornflower blue eyes. It was inevitable my bloke would have brown, though now my heroine has a man whose eyes are grey, but that's for different reasons. You have to be careful about birthdays. My character, Helena, has 2 because I forgot what I'd given her. Writing a series, this is no problem. In the next book, I commented that men often get their wives' birthdays wrong. And it usually gets a laugh when I say that. You have to be careful about behaviour traits, but that's part of the writing. The good thing is that you can develop your characters more slowly. You can develop them in much more detail if you write more and more books about them. Occasionally, you can kill them off if you want to. You do run the risk that readers will think they understand your characters more than you do, even though you are in control. Well, I am, believe me. You know who I was taught by. They will want things from you that you don't want to provide, and they won't want what you do want to provide. The dog wasn't in the last one enough. Why must Falco retire? They will condemn you for your character's actions. I had a lot of flack about Falco and Petronius at the end of the last book, killing Anacrates. People just told me it wasn't in their nature. Of course it was in their nature. And moreover, the emperor had set them up to do it. Nobody seems to see that, even though I spelled it out. You learn to ride with these things. The good thing is that readers will love the people you create, people who came out of your head, as if they were their own family. And let's face it, the way most people regard their relatives, better than their family. So I wrote 20 books about Falco and Helena.
among other projects, as Kathy mentioned to you. My giant Civil War book, because that is actually my real period. Standalones about lovely Vespasian and his equally lovely mistress, and about the reign of Domitian, a paranoid tyrant, from which I learned that I am a paranoid tyrant. I found it incredibly easy to write about Domitian. I understood him perfectly, and my behaviour became disgraceful, and people were shocked and horrified and wondered what was going wrong. Was I seriously ill or something? I was so tetchy with them. I also wrote a quick read, a book written for adults who are struggling to read for one reason or another, which I found very interesting because it was technically different and demanding. Well, not demanding, fun. After that, I needed to be refreshed and also to hijack a film company who had made me sign a contract where on one side it was me and on the other side it was them. Their man seemed to be called Beelzebub. And they had demanded spin-off rights, so being the person you have now learned I am, I decided that I would choose what the spin-off was going to be, and I choose someone, in fact, that they would never have chosen, a woman. So I'm writing now the Flavia Albia series about Falco's adopted daughter, set 12 years later than the last Falco novel. So first of all, she's grown up. Secondly, we've moved from the reign of a good emperor, which is fine in some respects, to a really bad emperor, which gives you a much darker background, and I think it's more interesting in some ways. It gives me the scope to write about the same places, the same people, the same city, to investigate the city more deeply than I had done, in fact. But to see it through the eyes of someone who is, first of all, a woman, not a man. Secondly, an outsider, because she comes from Britain and isn't a native-born Roman, though we don't know her background, really. I am enjoying it hugely. I have been astonished how long it has taken some people to accept her, although to me she's really good fun. People loved Falco so much they didn't want to lose him, even for his child. The really good thing for me is that I can actually write about Falco and Helena from a different point of view. He's telling us in the first person. It's always going to be his view. He respects Helena hugely. She's on a pedestal for him. He thinks that he's quite a good chap. I'll phrase it only as lightly as that. To Flavia Albia, they are her daft, eccentric, lovable, generous parents, but they are her parents. And to write the eye-rolling, oh no, what have they done now, stuff a child would write, for me is actually quite good fun. People are getting used to her. I'm writing now the 7th book, and by the 6th, they started to say shyly, we may like her more than him even. And this is actually wonderful to watch, though I'm astonished it took so long. In the new books, I've set them all so far in Rome, whereas Falco roamed through the empire so I could have tax-deductible holidays. Before I started Flavia Albia, I had pitched to my editors, both English and American, doing a series which I had called The 7 Hills of Rome, and for reasons I don't know, they both said no to that. So I started the first Flavia Albia, and it was set back on Falco's Hill, the Aventine, so I could do that again. I'd missed it a bit. I was ready to explore it more. And the second one, I think, I set by chance on the Escaline. And then the third one, I knew what I was doing, and that was on a hill. By the time I'd done 4 hills, they still didn't know what I was up to, and I felt... I am a kind-hearted girl sometimes. I had to point out to them that I was doing the 7 Hills of Rome, and they pretended they knew nothing at all about why I should think they didn't want that. So I have to do 7, and I'm now on the last one, which is the Capitol Hill. And we have been talking about animals. I would just like to say there is undoubtedly a debt to Dorothy in the fact that on the Capitol Hill, which is rather boring because it's all covered with temples, there are some people, if I can call them people, we have met before. And the moment when Flavia Albia's new dog starts a fight with the sacred geese of Juno, I think I must say has some debt to Dorothy. It's quite good fun, and you can research sacred geese quite well on the internet. The only thing I would say is that I have viewed the internet with care ever since I started researching them. People here may remember that a sinecure given to Falco was that he was made procurator of the sacred geese of Juno, giving them excellent huts as part of his role, which nobody had ever thought of before. I wrote a book where this happened, and then I was going to write another one, and I Googled sacred geese of Juno in order to find out, I thought, more Roman facts. And the first thing that came up was a quotation from my novel of the previous year. At that point, I thought, this is an entity to take with great care. But now there are all sorts of extra things, because it has expanded in the years that have gone by. And there are videos of geese attacking people and dogs, which I found extremely useful. So research is getting easier to do in some ways. I've done 5. I've now published the 6th. And as I've been asked to tell you a little bit about Pandora's Boy, I will dutifully do that, for I have been taught to follow what I am instructed to do. Pandora's Boy tackles the occult, cosmetics, and organised crime, a strange mixture. And it was, I think, almost entirely researched watching daytime TV. This may surprise you. I couldn't bear most of it. But I did watch, for the cosmetics, I watched things like QVC and similar, so that I could get the right vocabulary if you're talking about luxurious products. I've used ancient ingredients, but the vocabulary of the people selling this stuff comes entirely from daytime TV. The occult, obviously I had to look up ancient versions of the occult and how it was regarded. It was illegal in Rome, so that's good. That immediately tells you at some point there will be a seance which is broken up by the police. Good fun. Organised crime, well, I've been doing that for years, so programmes on mafia wives were good to watch from that point of view. And I was asked to review a book about mafia wives, so I said I couldn't do it because I never do that, but they sent it me anyway, and that was quite helpful. The one thing I hadn't expected, which has given the book a really good structure, was that as I looked into how mediums work, there's quite a lot of material about exposing the way that mediums find out about the people, the gullible people who are in terrible trouble, on whom they are going to prey for money, let's face it. It struck me that it was very similar to how Albia has to work. She has to find out about people, and then if you do, as I occasionally do, the scene at the end of the novel where all the suspects and witnesses are gathered together, and the private eye, Albia, takes charge and brings the whole story together and gets the final confessions out of people. It's very similar to what happens when a medium is talking to their clients or victims, depending how you see it. I was very pleased with that last-minute thought on giving the book enormous structure. You will like that, I'm sure. I'm supposed to say that. Other people are telling me, plug the book. It also had an interesting challenge, which was good fun. Occasionally, there's something that's special that comes up to a book. I am occasionally a traveller with, and sometimes I work for, Andante Travel, who do archaeological tours. And they had asked me to chair a debate, which was to be held in the Ashmolean Museum. While the speakers and I, as their chairman, were waiting to be brought on to the dais where we were to sit and speak, we were put in the side room of the Ashmolean, where there were 2 huge lumps of stone that could have been anything. One of the speakers was an Egyptologist and pointed out that they were in fact an Egyptian fertility god called Min. While we tried not to sing the Ying Tong song, she told us about Min's attributes, and in fact he was associated in a strange way with Glaucus Lettuce, Later on, after the debate, when we all had a drink in our hand, the other people said, well, Lindsey, wonder if you could get Min into a book. In Pandora's Boy, I have done, and he is quite important and has all the attributes he should have, one of which gets broken off. That's just a little flyer to get you interested. So, before we move on to questions, which we have loads of time for, I've got more time to tell you things. Influences. Let's go back to them. I did meet Dorothy, and I have seen at this very conference books I signed for her, which show that we talked about which books of mine she actually owned, and I gave her the ones she didn't own. That was a teary moment, I must say. She was influential, apart from praising me in print. She was influential in, I think, obtaining appearances for me at the Edinburgh Book Fest. I'm not allowed to tell you if I'm appearing at this year's Edinburgh Book Fest, but if I were, I might. So, before she died, it was not long before she died, we went to dinner together at the Balmoral and had a long conversation. We were indisputably two successful authors talking together on a par as two successful authors, enjoying our success, enjoying writing historical novels. I didn't take notes, perhaps you think I should have done, but it was a more friendly occasion than that. And I can't remember exactly what we talked about. I know that we didn't go into the nitty-gritty of how we each wrote our books. We didn't need to, because partly we knew, and partly how I did mine and how she did hers was private to both of us. And that is why I really think I want you to be very careful when you want any author to be influenced by any other, because I think Dorothy would have agreed with me saying this, that to be a really good author, you have to do your own thing. And it's having your own voice that makes the difference between that and being not a very good author. It's the mediocre and the outright failures who have to gather in anxious clusters, having peer review, people who are uncertain about how they're going to proceed. They have to have mentors. I never had a mentor, and I don't believe Dorothy did either. They are the ones who put enormous messages, really pages of messages of thanks to the people who have helped them in the front. And Dorothy and I might occasionally put a short dedication in the front of a book, but it would be very short. And I've stopped doing it because I'm not very sociable and I ran out of friends, to be honest. What I'm saying to you very strongly is that if you know what you're doing, you get on with it and you do it in your own way. You have a sense of purpose and certainty, and we know Dorothy had that. You have a story to tell, maybe many, and you're damn well going to do it, not seeking help like a wimp, because it's wimps who lack the authority to win and to hold and to entrance their audience. That's what makes the difference. So I'm going to finish by reading something of mine to you. It's not what you expect, probably, and it's not what I normally am allowed to do, because normally I have to read a bit from my latest tome, but on this occasion I'm going to go back to something I wrote that is non-fiction. It's Falco, the Official Companion, a book I wrote at the request of my readers, and also to stop a very dry as dust American librarian spending his retirement writing something he called a lexicon of Falco. Luckily for me, a Scottish author called J.K. Rowling, don't know if you know her, had taken to court people doing something similar to her and had managed to gain the court's decision that no author should be prevented from exploiting their own work. So I was able to write Falco, the Official Companion. I think it was what my readers actually would expect, in that it's not like any other book. It's not like any other companion to a series. I am thorough, I was well taught. I read some, and mine is different. As you will see from this section, this is the section, it's only a page, it's the section called Influences. It starts with a quotation from Poseidon's Gold. Manlius and Varga came swinging back home in the dead of night. arguing at the top of their voices with a gang of other artistic delinquents. That's the end of the quotation. People always want to know, what are your influences? Falco's tiny hand is frozen as he waits for the free-spirited fresco painters. I wonder how many readers have spotted the seepage from the opera La Bohème. I never noticed. I don't enjoy opera. I won't go to opera. I like music for its own sake. I want words you can hear and understand. I find most musicals watery. I only care about Gilbert and Sullivan and the repertoire of English satirical song and Tom Lehrer. So, do Manlius and Varga reveal an authentic influence? Of course not. I'm always very cautious about influences. I suspect people want to believe I've based my writing on someone else's, perhaps because that is what they would do, or because some twerp of a tutor says to ask the question. For me, writing must be original. I deliberately chose the Roman period to be different. If the Falco novels are influenced by Sutcliffe or Chandler or Tristram Shandy or Giles cartoons or Round the Horn or Shakespeare or The Mikado or Liquidated Damages, building contracts, or Byron's Don Juan or My Mum, it's only a starting point. People who know me say in astonishment, "It sounds just like you." Exactly. You could just as well say my influences are Dido's Lament, Vaughan Williams' Fantasia, Tchaikovsky's Pathétique, and all the other music Richard and I love, especially with Julian Bream or Alicia de la Rocha. Or they are sausages, beef bourguignon, lemon meringue pie, bacon sandwiches with HB sauce, macadamia nuts, pesto pasta, Stilton and cheddar. Or loathing pretension, or needing to pay the mortgage. Everything I have ever seen, heard, read, everyone I ever met, every place I remember lurks in the subconscious, ready to give me ideas. Ideas are just an unopened packet of plasticine. It takes particular thumbs to mould them. Enough of influences. The next passage was about errors. I haven't brought it with me. It's a shame. Buy the book, read it for yourself. So that is all I am going to say in the first instance, and now I think is the moment when I will leap to my feet so more of you can see me and I can see more of you, and we will have questions if you have any. So I'm leaping to my feet. A hand, right? It's Kathy.
Could I just ask you, Lindsey, about
Grammar. I'm not going to tell you what grammar is, or indeed word choice. Yes, you can. Thank you very much. But what a lovely question. You are just such a gorgeous audience. I believe in grammar. I did, as I told you, a degree that was English literature and language, and in fact they were equally important to me, and sometimes I even loved the language more than the literature. On the literature side, I did the stuff. I got a good Oxford degree. I'll now tell you where it was, and therefore I know what you're supposed to know about poetry and prose. I preferred prose, which most people didn't. But I did love the language side. I think an author ought to know the rules of grammar. Pauline is looking approving here. For one thing, unless you know what the rules are, you can't break it. A lot of what I write is in the first person, and therefore it is conversational in style. It is to be presumed to be a translation from Latin, usually Latin, sometimes other languages, and it's actually, it would be a Latin that isn't the Latin some of us learned at school. It would be some street version of Latin, maybe a provincial version of Latin that we don't even know. So I have to find something that hints to readers that it is ancient people talking. It can't be too modern. People sometimes say it is too modern, but that's because what I'm writing is a kind of spoof of American gumshoe novels, American ones in particular. And I have had to find my own way of doing that. the invention of it has been one of the joys for me. Words have to be chosen very carefully. They have to sometimes be words that people won't know. I won't include quotations. I know you are used to books that include a lot of quotations. And when I was younger, I thought that was a good thing to do. But I shy off it. Particularly, I shy off quoting Latin, because every time I've done it, I've made a grammatical Latin mistake in it. And I do still know, as well as Pauline, my Latin teacher. And she says nothing, but it grieves her, I know. A couple of books ago, there was a bit where Albia made a joke about gerunds, and unfortunately, she quoted the wrong, there's man nodding. Yes, you can say that her getting the gerund wrong in her quotation is an extra joke. That's what I say. The most difficult thing is swearing, because if you use modern swearing, and because I write about low life quite often and soldiers and people like that, they will be swearing, there's no doubt about it. And if I use modern words, I think that would be the most jarring in writing about the ancient world. So I have invented my own system of swearing, including things, it's lovely to do, flying fallacies, Triton's turds. It's really good to do. The only exception to that was in my book about Domitian. I couldn't bear to make Domitian really the totally central character and live with him for a year, even though he was, like me, a paranoid tyrant. So I chose to have a hero who's a soldier. He's the Praetorian Guard who, at the end of the book, does the death blow. The whole reason for writing the book is there's a wonderful assassination at the end, organised by a civil service committee. Not enough attention is paid to this aspect in textbooks, but I had a whale of a time doing it. As I was writing about Gaius, though, I wanted to make him sound like a soldier. He's got to be more soldierly even than Falco, who has been a soldier, but not for very long. And I had an interesting discussion with my editor, who is a lovely lad, well, 10 years younger than me. And he is slightly puritanical. He has censored out a couple of sex scenes that offended him. He was probably right to do so. And I felt I had to go to him and say, Oliver, is it all right if Gaius sometimes, not excessively, uses the F word? Because in this particular book, I think he should. And Oliver came straight back to me and said, oh, he's a soldier, that's perfectly okay. So in Master and God, the F word is used, but most often I don't do that. I use subtle allusions or made-up phrases. I also, because I love words, I use words that I draw from all sorts of backgrounds, including a lot of words that I grew up with in the Midlands, which Oliver, as a public school boy who comes from the South, somebody has to. And my American editor, of course, and my American readers, they don't know. So I use words that to me seem perfectly ordinary, like mithering and mardy. And I used scrumping, and he questioned it. Is this one of your made-up words? No, everybody knows what scrumping is. The fact that Hercules is getting the golden apples and he's basically scrumping should be a beautiful use of language, Oliver. I am allowed sometimes to invent my own words. He thinks there is a rule that I am only allowed to invent one word per book. I think the more I can get past him, the better. And there is a competition. Well, it's not really a competition, but people are allowed to write to me and say, is the invented word so-and-so? There was also a movement in Australia once, which I was really proud of, that they would get knick-knackaroonie jars, plates, trays, would be brought into Australian. I don't know how far they've got with that, but that is a made-up word, owing something to my Auntie Gladys. Has that answered your question? Would anybody like to ask another question, which doesn't have to be about language? Yes, lady at the back in black. I don't know your names. You have to tell me. Deliberately? No. No, not deliberately. Enough people, especially in America, I'm afraid, think that things I have done are anachronisms, and I get enough emails to answer on that subject that I wouldn't go down that route. The one thing I do say is that it's more a question of historical facts, really. I like finding really interesting things that you might not expect, as of course Dorothy did. And there was a moment when I was talking to some students, if I may name drop, students of Mary Beard's once, and a girl stood up and she owned up to me that she'd been talking to her tutor about Roman houses, which notoriously were fragile because their foundations weren't deep enough. And she had been describing this and had suddenly realized that what she was taking as her provenance was the horrible scene in Venus in Copper where Falco's flat falls down. A scene you may like to know, which was researched mainly through watching films of Fred Dibner, who used to the lovely way he would demolish a chimney stack by putting explosives in, and then it would just neatly. If you ever reread that scene, you'll see how I did it. And that made me think that there is a responsibility, maybe there is, on me, to not invent stuff. I always say I use real stuff, even if it's surprising, it probably is real. But then I add, possibly as a dream, I would invent some really strange historical fact, and I wouldn't be obliged to tell you, maybe I have done it. With the rider now that I am getting on in years, and I won't even remember myself that I did. Right, yes.
First of all, just a slight point is that if anybody doesn't know what the attributes of men are, see me afterwards. I will explain. And also, you did mention briefly in your talk, film.
Yes. You would note a note in my voice there. Yes.
Okay.
Film. Yes. Well, when I was a very baby author and had only written 3 Falco novels it must have been, I had a film made by Columbia TV, which was going to be their pilot for a series they would write themselves, thereby teaching me not to allow that in the Beelzebub contract unless I had to. And they made a film called The Age of Treason. I sometimes call it The Age of Reason and Laugh. It had Brian Brown, the blonde Australian actor, on whom I once had a crush, playing Falco. It had Falco's mother was many times divorced, although the crucial thing about Falco's mother is that she won't admit that she has lost her husband because he ran off. It had a black Petronius, because you have to. It had did not recognise that Helena Justina, my heroine, was Falco's lifetime partner, because you can't have a girl. So it invented Justus the Gladiator to be Falco's buddy. And because they were writing Justus the Gladiator, they were more interested in him even than Falco. Falco stood around going, oh, that's very interesting, Justus. Recently, the Birmingham and Midland Institute have study days, which are really good, but on this occasion they were doing a Falco study day, and they found a clip, a 10-minute clip of this film, and after 7 minutes, the whole audience, not only I, were begging them to turn it off. So my relationship with film starts there. The good thing was that they bought the rights to all the characters in allegedly The Silver Pig, so it bears no relation to that. And so for 7 years, nobody else could do films. And by the end of that time, of course, I was more famous, and so was Falco, and I was able to become the woman you have seen here today. And the next people who came along were the BBC, who were going to make the biggest drama series ever made, because they loved the Falco book so much, and spend more money on it than anything, though not much on me, I can say. And they had it for a few years, and I had all the rights by then. consultation this, consultation that. And in the end, they bought the HBO series Rome because that was ready-made, and I was cast to one side, and that was all right. I knew by then that if a film was made, it would break my heart. There was no way they would make. Whoever said, however much they said, they loved my work for what it was, that's not what they would do. And their excuse would be that they know what works on film, and I clearly couldn't, even though I probably watch more television than they do. And now I have an option with Mammoth Film, who make many really well done series, and they've had it for 7 years. And only this week I am saying to them, all right, you can have 6 months more and then I'm taking it away. And we will see whether they really want to make Falco because they love him, although they describe him as tall and rangy in the first line of their script. No, short and dark and stocky. We'll see. I would rather not talk any more about it. Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, Lady in Purple.
Yeah. How do you come up with all the Roman names? I don't think you really repeated any.
Oh, I have sometimes, because names are common. How do I find the Roman names? Well, I am well taught, so I go to Roman inscriptions, Roman tombstones, Roman things. I find, if I've got someone who comes from a particular province, I find the stuff from that province and get names that would exist in that province, or I make them up. When I started, I didn't realize how difficult readers would find Roman names. To me, it's no more difficult than reading great Russian literature, and they all have 3 names and they're anyway called Sasha, which is not one of their names. The thing about the Roman system is that it cannot have worked the way textbooks try to say it worked. Men had 3 names, of which the first would seem to be like our first names, but if you think of Vespasian's family, every single chap in every generation has Titus as his first name. They cannot at breakfast have been saying, Titus, pass the butter. It would not have worked. So they clearly use their names in a different way. And that there is visibly a kind of formality and informality in how many of their names are used at any one time. And I have, in the Falco Companion, it tells you how I devised my system for that. But briefly, it's that when Falco and Helena are talking to each other, he's Marcus. If somebody else comes in and she's being a bit more formal, she says Marcus Didius. If a stranger comes, she will say Didius Falco. If he's really annoyed her, she'll say, Marcus Didius Falco, how dare. It's that sort of subtlety. Copy editors, the people who read your books to get consistency, can't do it. They loathe it. They constantly try to alter it. But I understand what I am doing. It may not be right, but then it's fiction. It doesn't matter if it's not right. As long as my job is to persuade you that what I'm saying is right, whether it is or not. There was a hand at the back, yes.
I've actually seen the Falco movie. And I saw all of it. I think they spent £1.50 on sets, and the screenwriting, I think, has been a pound.
Yes, I got 20p, I think.
I actually have a question on influences. I've read a few books.
It's really that I noticed that the Roman Empire gave me the scope to have different kinds of adventures. There are series where every book is the same. Not Dorothy, obviously, but it's especially in mystery stories. And some readers like that. They like to know exactly what they're going to get. But I would be bored to tears and couldn't do it. So right from the start, he goes out of Rome in the first book to Britain, but that's to make publishers feel safe because they were scared of the Romans. In the second book, he goes to the Bay of Naples because I wanted to showcase Roman archaeology. And then I thought, yes, he's got to come back to Rome for the next one because he's Roman. So Venus in Copper is set in Rome very much. And after that, the idea came to me that every other book, more or less, if there was a suitable story came to mind, he could go to a part of the Roman Empire, because part of my job with this is to showcase the fact that they were an imperial power. And I had great fun going to the countries that he goes to. And I went to some countries which certainly as a civil servant I would not have been allowed to go, like Libya and Syria. And I'm glad I did when I did. I had a friend who was a fearless traveller, which I am not. And Helen would say, I want to go to Libya, and I'd go with her because that would probably be my only chance of going. And I've seen things which we now know are destroyed by evil people. So I'm really glad I did it. And it gave texture to the series, and it allowed him to be not just the gumshoe plodding the pavements, which I think he does well, but also to have more adventure stories along the way. And it was interesting to me. What is fascinating is that I don't have the same feel that I need to do it with Albia. And so far she's only been in Rome, and I'm thinking that the next one will stay in Rome as well until I'm ready to move her out. She goes out on day trips and has sex with Tiberius on the way, but that's by the way. Well, on the way. Has that answered your question? The thing about the tax deductible stuff is it is a business expense if I'm researching, but it's business, not pleasure, so I have to not enjoy it. I am really good at not enjoying sitting in the sun with a glass of wine in my hand looking at a foreign place. Lady at the back. No. Oh, I have all those. Yes. I have chosen my latest house because it had a room that was big enough to have me working. It's my study, and I'm in there all day, so I don't want one of those ones they build under a staircase. And it has had, added by me, as many bookcases as could be fitted in, and they are full of my research books. My other books are elsewhere in the house. Oh yes. My most recent one was a book on smells. Yes. People always want to know how you write, and sometimes it's because they think if they did the same, but I know you're more sensible than that. My daily routine, do you want me to tell you what it is? It will be quite quick because it starts with sort of getting up, do my exercises, have my hot bath for my back, have my breakfast. Oh, it's coffee time. Oh, it's time to go to my trainer, whose name, incidentally, is Marcus, but that isn't gives me an odd feeling, that. I chose the name Marcus for Falco because I thought it's an English name as well, and it wouldn't be too foreign. Going back to a previous question, I hope you notice how I'm linking the questions here. Then it's lunchtime, or I'm exhausted by doing my exercises with Marcus. Then I have to get over lunch. And about 3 o'clock, I sit down in front of my ergonomically checked computer in my specially framed for me chair, and I write. And I don't mess about. By now, I ought to be able to write a Falco or an Albia book, shouldn't I? So I don't mess about. And about the time Pointless comes on, which is 5:15 for those of you who don't watch Pointless, or earlier if it's snooker, I stop. And the next day I do the same, and I go back over what I wrote the previous day and polish it. But by now it's all there, and it will only need more jokes putting in. Anything I can take out, I take out, because that's the best thing, is to prune it as much as you can. Add more jokes or better jokes, and then move forward. And I turn in a book a year, which is very unusual. I've done that for 30 years, except the year my mum died and I was a fortnight late. Not to write, no. I start writing about Christmas. I hand it in on the 30th of June at midnight. Another Pauline story, of course, that when I was at school, this is in my genes, I would do my homework at the very last minute and I would be going up the corridor to put it in the pigeonholes where the teachers collected work as the relevant teacher was coming down the other way. And I have never changed. That is how I work. But I do hand them in. So I don't know where motivation comes from. I do enjoy my work. It's not a chore. But that's the system. What's a plot? No, I don't. Some do. I have a friend who has a synopsis that is 68 pages long. I would be bored to tears if I had to sit down and write up a 68-page synopsis. I do a synopsis as a courtesy for my editors, and it will say something like, it's another Albia book. This one is set in so-and-so. The first death, I usually know when the first death occurs, is so-and-so, and the suspect clique is whatever it is. I will probably not know who did it. I will not at that stage know who else has to be killed, because Oliver likes more bodies. And also, you know, Raymond Chandler said, if you're stuck, have a man burst through a door with a gun in his hand. With the Romans, you can't do that, because they did, even I know, they didn't have guns, and people will write you emails if you give them a gun. So about when I do get stuck, I kill somebody else off, and who it is will evolve in the writing. I like to be like my readers. I like to sit down and think, now where are we going today? What are we going to find out? Oliver has taught me that each chapter must produce something useful. So that's plot, isn't it? And so I go until I've reached about 90%, maybe a bit more, 90%, and then I go back and I read it all through so I can see if what I believe is called the story arc, though we never had that at school, is right. And as I do that, I make notes of any ends that need to be tied up, and they are on bits of paper around me. When you say a big chart of plot, that's that. And so I write the end very fast because I've actually got notes telling me what to put in. And it's solved, and then there's often a little coda of something, and that's it really. 100,000 words on the nail, email them off. With email, you can finish even closer to your deadline. I like that very much. Lady at the back, I'll come to you in a minute. Yes. I don't know whether to be scared or what. Yes, yes.
I was just wondering whether you ever had this when you came up with Albia, people were surprised with a man when you write about female.
No, they know now that I am a woman. Because I have a name that can be either a man's or a woman's, I didn't want it ever to be said which I was. But of course you have to have your author photo in the back, and you have to be sent out to events, and people would eventually have realised. I have had readers who said, I thought you were a man, in the same way that I've had readers who assumed that I was a classicist. I gently put them straight, really. I think it's very interesting that women can write well about men, but men seem unable to write well about women. Many men can't do it, or don't do it, or write books in which there are no women. And what I always say is that I can do men in the same way that I can do children and dogs and now geese. I've met some. My job is to observe. I can observe men just the same as I can observe women. I've known some men really well, and elements of men that I have known are certainly in Falco, and that's why he's a nice bloke, because in the end, I met some nice ones, one nice one in particular. Yes, it's an interesting area, isn't it? There was someone lurking here, yes. I usually know who's dead. For instance, the one I'm just writing now, somebody falls off the Tarpeian rock or is pushed. I believe that in creative writing schools they would send me to the back of the class for this attitude. But I have written, as Kathy said, 33 books, and people like them. My answer to you would be that everybody writes in a different way, and you can't ask for the prescription. If people have no idea at all, yes, tell them they've got to have a structure worked out before they start. But that's not necessarily the only way to do it. I know I'm writing a mystery novel, so that has its own structure. There has to be a problem. It doesn't have to be a death, but it almost always is a death. There has to be an investigation, and that makes it easier to write because you go and you talk to the people who might know the answers. And then usually there is an answer. So that gives the book its backbone, and that's probably a very good thing for me to have. As I said to you, with my Domitian book, that hadn't got the same structure, but I knew I was aiming to the death of Domitian. And so that gave me something to go to. But no, I sense your disapproval coming in here. I don't think very many people do it my way, and I think a lot of writers would be terrified to do it my way. Sometimes I know. When I wrote the book about the would-be writers, I knew before I started the publisher would be dead and the perpetrator would be a writer he had rejected. Sometimes it makes its own. When I wrote the one about theatres in Last Act in Palmyra, and there are twins, I didn't know it was the twins until quite late on. I didn't know which twin. I more or less tossed a coin as to which twin it would be. I'm going to tell you a joke about the Domitian book, which I've told you. I was working to the assassination, which is it's a really good assassination scene, and he's dead, and they go off into the sunset because we think that the Gaius character did escape. Somebody recently said to me, "Is there going to be a sequel to Master and God?" Yes. Is that gale of laughter when we should perhaps go to lunch, or are there any desperate other questions? There is. There's one.
You've been talking about discovering what's going to happen as you write.
Yes.
And I wondered, because you mentioned earlier the fun of showing Falco through Albia's eyes.
Yes.
Whether you discovered more about Falco by doing that.
Yes.
He showed us things you didn't know already.
Yes, I think I have, because she is seeing him as a father. And in Pandora's Boy, actually, he and she do have a little bit more interchange than I had previously shown. And something goes horribly wrong. And we see him as he must be as a father, which I don't think in the Falco series we do get to see, partly because his children are too young, really. We know that he adores the cute little ones. And we know that he probably will adopt the child who he knows isn't really his father's child. He'll pretend it is, and that'll be all right. And we know that really it's Helena who wants to adopt Albia, but Falco is going to be good over it. But we rarely see him. He's an uncle quite often. He's an uncle with Larius, his favourite nephew, in Shadows in Bronze. And there are some scenes he has when Albia's very distressed over her broken heart, where they have a lovely little bit of interchange. But we're seeing him now in a different role, and also we're seeing him as the owner of the auction house, being a businessman, which we haven't seen before. So yes, I'm still developing Falco. If people want to trust me, he's there. And we don't see so much of Helena, but she has just she's just solved something, and Albia wishes she'd keep out of the plot because it's Albia's case, and her mother is interfering. So there are things that can happen. Okay.
Okay. Well. I can't believe, Lindsey, that we've actually.
I know. I told you we'd need more time.
That's great. I think Pauline must be very proud.
Right. She will tell me at lunch what I did wrong.
That was just so wonderful. Thank you very, very much.